Welcome back. So we implemented this simple stateless lottery ball component. I guess we just called it ball. Now let's worry about the parent, the stateful component called lottery. So let's begin with the props, the default props. It's an easy win. So come over here and make my new component, which we'll call lottery.js. And then our standard thing, again, I'll fast forward through this. Okay, so we're going to begin with our default props. So static default props. And inside of that, we have title, which we talked about. So the default title can just be lotto. We're also going to have num of balls, so num balls and max num. Num balls will default to 6, and max num is going to default to 40. Great. Next, let's work on the constructor. So in our constructor, we're going to do super props. I'm going to show you later. I'm going to change the code so that we absolutely have to have super props here, but right now we're not actually going to use props in the constructor, but we are going to set initial state, and all we need to keep track of is an array called nums. And we can begin with an empty array, but you'll see I'm going to revisit this in a bit and change it. You'll see why in just a moment. Next, of course, we need our render method. So render is going to return, let's use a section instead of a div, and give it a class name that matches the component, lottery. And then inside of here, we have a couple of things. We need the title. We want to display all of the balls and actually render these ball components. And we need a button. Let's begin with the title as an h1, this.props.title. And then after that, let's make a div where eventually we'll put the balls. Let's just say balls go here. And then after that, let's add our button. And the button will say generate or draw balls or something like that. And we need to give it an on click, which will come back and actually implement this. For now, let's just call it this.handleClick. So it doesn't exist at the moment. Now we have a couple of choices. Do we want to start by iterating over nums and displaying a bunch of balls here, even though we don't actually have anything in nums? Or should we implement handleClick first and make it so that we actually generate new numbers? I'm going to go with the latter, so I'm going to define handleClick. And here, what I'm actually going to do is define another function or another method, and this one will be called generate. Why am I breaking it up? Well, I'm just going to have handleClick call generate. And this is a pattern we'll see later on. It's really just a choice about style. A lot of people like to have their event handlers called handle X, handle click, handle drag, handle submit, and then they can call some other code that is more specific. You could just have this directly call generate. It doesn't make a difference. Okay, so in generate, what we need to do is pick a bunch of random numbers that are between 1 and max num, whatever max num is, and how many times we need to pick those numbers depends on max balls. Then we'll create an array with them and add them to this.state under nums. Before I implement this, I want to address the empty array that we're starting with. So we have this empty slot where if we iterate over it and make a bunch of balls, at the beginning of the page when it loads, there will be nothing displayed. It will just be a button. And instead, what I want is to have a bunch of orange balls that have no numbers on them. I want them to be there at the beginning, and then you click generate and the numbers show up. So if we were working with 6 items, 6 balls, I want there to be 6 slots already made in this array so that I can loop over it 6 times and make 6 balls, even if they don't have numbers. So instead of setting it to an empty array, I'm going to make an array that has as many slots as max balls is inside of our props. And the easiest way to do that is array.from, and then we pass in length, and this will make an array based off of whatever length we give it. This will make an array of 10 items, but we want this.props.maxBalls. So let's begin by just displaying this. So in my app component, make sure I'm exporting lottery. In my app, I'm going to import lottery from ./lottery. And then we'll make a single lottery component here and won't pass any props in. Oh, whoops, it's giving me an error because my constructor does not take props. Hopefully you saw that before me. All right, so if we inspect this right now, we're still not seeing anything, but in the state of our component, what we should see, if we go to the lottery component, look at state, is an empty array. Well, it's an array with 6 empty spots, 6 nulls. And that's what we want, because now I can actually loop over this and make my balls, even though they won't have numbers. So let's do that. Down here in this div where it says balls go here, we're going to iterate over this.state.nums, and I'm going to use map, and let's just call each number n. And then what do we want to return? We want a ball component where we pass in num is equal to n. So we're iterating over this.state.nums, which starts empty, but by default there's 6 empty slots, 6 nulls, and then for each one we're making a ball where we pass in that number, which doesn't exist, it's null, to num as a prop, or to ball as the prop num. Then it should be displayed, and the only thing we'll run into right now is that we don't actually have access to ball. So import ball from /ball. Now, fingers crossed, we should be seeing 6 empty balls. And if we inspect them with React, we can see what our state looks like. Once again, 6 empty slots, 6 nulls, and each ball has no props because we passed null in, so it's not displaying a number, but we have at least space for it. We have these orange balls. Now, we have this set up. Let's go back and make our click work. So it calls generate, and now all we do is loop over or map over our nums in the state, and for each one, generate a new random number, build this array, and then set state with that array. So I'm going to begin with just the logic to build the random number. So we've seen this a million times in this course, math.floor, math.random, times some number. So we're going to multiply it by this.props.maxNum. So this will help us get a number from 0 to 40. However, that's actually wrong. It's going to be between 0 and 39. And we want 1 to 40. So at the end, after we floor it, we're going to add 1. So this will give us one number. So we're going to use set state now. So I'm going to do this.set state. And I'm going to use that callback method. And I'm going to pass in a callback instead of an object, as we learned earlier in this section. So the callback, let's go with cur state, like that. And then what we want to return, this object, and we're going to set nums to be cur state.nums.map. And let's do n. We're not going to use it because we don't really care what's in there at the moment. We're not updating it based off of the current value. We just need to have those slots already there, 6 empty spaces. Or they may not be empty later on, but it doesn't matter because we're just replacing them with new numbers. And now we can just copy this in. So this is the logic to give us one random number that's within our proper range. And if we paste it in here, all that we're doing, if I save and reformat this, we're saying take the current state and set nums to now be current state.nums.map. So that's going to create a new array of the same length. And for each number in there, or for each spot, we're going to just pick a random number between between 1 and then this.props.maxNum. And that should be it for us. That should actually be everything we need to do, except for making sure that I've bound my method. Right now, if I call this.handleClick, if I click it, we're going to have a bad time because it's unable to actually figure out what this is once again. So up top in the constructor, this.handleClick equals this.handleClick.bind this. And before we test it out, I just want to address this. I know for some of you this is sort of confusing why we do it this way, but just remember this is something you'll get used to. We don't mutate these objects and arrays directly. Instead, we're building a new array from scratch, and then we're setting state with that new array. So if you wanted to, you don't have to do it this way using map. If you wanted, you could use a for loop. It's not that common to see people do it, but it works. You can make a loop, generate your new numbers, put them in a new array 6 times or however many times, and then set state using that. But this is what you'll see a lot of the time, people using things like map, using these pure functions. Okay, fingers crossed. If I click, we're getting new numbers, and each time they're changing. Looks good to me. Lastly, we can work on styling, but let's just check that our props are working as well. So let's come back over here and make a second lottery component, but this one will pass in a title. And let's set title to be, let's just copy what we did in the slides, mini daily. And then we'll set max num to be 10. And then the number of balls will be 40. Will be 4. Oops, that should be max balls. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, num balls is a much better name. I think that's what I wanted to do originally. So we can update that over here. I'll make it num instead of max. And then over here, this will be num balls. and I'll do the same thing there. So now we got this going on. We've got 4 of them. These are all between 1 and 10. And here we've got the default 6, which are between 1 and 40. And we also have the title changing. All right, so that's it. If you want, you can stick around for a bit. I'm going to do some styling, just put a little border around, change the color of the button, but it's pretty meaningless stuff as far as React is concerned. So in my lottery component, I'm going to import a non-existent file, lottery.css, and I'm going to make that file now. Same approach, lottery.css. And then if we take a look, we gave a class name down here of lottery. That's fine. And once again, I won't make you watch me type it all. So here's what I did. I gave each lottery component a border, gave it some padding, text align center, some margin, border radius, so it has a slight rounded edge here. It's really not very beautiful. And then the button, I just selected the buttons inside of the lottery component, background color, make the text white, larger font size, a little rounding as well, and some margin on top. And there we go. We have the working component. Relatively simple example. This is really just to show you, well, 2 things. One, designing a component, this downward flow of data, that whole idea of managing your state in the parent, and then rendering these sort of stupid display components that we did, the balls. And then in addition, I want to give you another example of how we can update state, mutate state without actually mutating the existing state, where we make a copy and then save that using setState.